or questions? Go ahead, David.
Well, a couple observations first. Too many damn engineers in this place.
What?
Aren't you tired of politicians, though?
Well, you know, unfortunately, I went to the dark side, but I still qualify. I'd like to commend Mr. Yusuf for saying one thing: life, liberty, and property, which was originalist, as opposed to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I think that's an important distinction, as our current government's trying to take away all my property. But a question for Kevin that I wanted to ask, and that was when you were making the comments about the insurance, you refrained from speaking about Shaheen and her administration, her family that were instrumental in driving the insurance out of this state, or the competition out of this state. And I don't think enough is made about that, or said about that, or is known about that, that I just wanted to get some expanded comment on.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought it up. That's because Barbara gave me the 1-minute signal, so I was cutting things out. No, you're absolutely right. It was because of a senator, then a state senator, Jeanne Shaheen, that pushed through all of these mandates on the insurance carriers back in the 1990s, right before she became governor, and just expanded them when she became governor. Governor Benson, in the 2 years he was in there, actually started to roll back some of that, and then it was completely reversed when John Lynch got in there. You know, I talk about the maternity coverage thing. You know, I didn't drill down into the weeds on this, but this is what it means in terms of how it's artificially inflated the cost. So because most group coverages in New Hampshire require maternity coverage to be a part of your coverage plan, again, if you looked at plans between Virginia and the state of New Hampshire, and you wanted an individual plan in the state of Virginia and wanted maternity coverage as a rider on that plan, because it's not mandated, it's an additional $71 a month to have it. Same individual plan in New Hampshire, if you wanted maternity coverage as a rider, it's $650 a month. That's how we've so badly artificially, you know, inflated the cost for health insurance in the state of New Hampshire. And it's, again, because of all of these service mandates that Jeanne Shaheen was instrumental in packing on to the insurance companies, such that a lot of small business owners don't even purchase insurance today. I mean, I'm a small business owner, I'm self-employed, I pay over $17,000 a year right now out of pocket to pay for my family plan. But I talked to small business owners around the state today when I asked what they're paying, and they said, Kevin, we dropped our coverage. We're hoping nothing catastrophic happens, but we're taking the risk now that, you know, we're not going to have too many trips to the doctors versus how much it would have cost us otherwise. That's unacceptable in our state to have it. But Jeanne Shaheen absolutely was the catalyst for making that happen. Yeah.
Is there any more questions? Go ahead.
I have a question for Kevin. You mentioned the cost of energy in New Hampshire. Now, what do you think about Northern Pass?
Yeah, you know, I came out very strongly against the way they had proposed that project in terms of how they were going to run the lines. You know, in my opinion, the property rights of the private property owners trump everything else.
Talking about eminent domain.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no way eminent domain should have been used for that project, and they backed off of it now because there was so much outcry over it. But it would have cast a terrible precedent if they were allowed to use eminent domain for that project. But even running the towers along the right-of-ways is going to have a significant impact on devaluing the land of the private property owners in that area. Tom Mullen, who is the owner of the Owl's Nest Resort in Campton, he hasn't sold the place in over a year on his resort because he has to disclose every time someone's looking at a place there that they might have towers in their backyard. So just the prospect of it coming through is already starting to devalue the land. So I like what Senator Forrester has done. She's established a study committee to look at alternative ways of doing it, whether we have an energy corridor in the state that other states have done. Let's look at perhaps burying the lines in some areas. But, you know, the original proposal that was on the table should be completely off the table. I've met with PSNH. They know my firm feelings on this, and I'll do everything I can to protect, you know, the private property rights of, you know, the owners of that.
You wouldn't want it in the National Forest either.
What's that?
You would not want it in the National Forest.
No, I agree.
Let them run in the Connecticut River on the Vermont side.
I like that idea.
In that same vein, yeah. Isn't it true that if PSNH runs the towers, they get $50-something million a year. If they bury the lines down the center of the state on the state highway, the state will get $50 million. Right. That's why there's such a big argument for not burying the lines. The lines, you just But
Well,
that's not true. I think Canada can do that, and
Right.
they would be willing to do that.
PSNH stands to lose money if they were to run them down the quarter, let's say the 93 quarter, or run them down 89 or whatever. Yeah, they would stand to lose money from that. And again, the power is going to primarily Massachusetts and Connecticut. I mean, it all goes on the grid. It'll have a marginal impact at best, but we're already a net exporter of energy. New Hampshire's primarily being used as a conduit for that particular project.
Kevin, should you find that there is a $50 million income from that,
Yeah.
don't look at it as found money, use it to reduce taxes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there any more questions? Skip, go ahead.
Both you, and this is a question for both you and Josh, Kevin. Both of you have said that we need a smaller, more limited government here, and that you want to reduce the business taxes to make it a more business-friendly state.
Yep.
Which leaves one of the biggest revenue sources is really the federal government. Now, we have now just had, or will about to have, the 4th consecutive year of a $1 trillion deficit. We are now going to top 16 trillion in just a few short months for our total debt. Well above 100% of our GDP. At some point that becomes unsustainable. Now the problem here is that New Hampshire derives much of its income from the federal government. What are your plans on safeguarding New Hampshire for when that money finally runs out? I know that as a budget committee member, I warned the town of Guilford, at some point the state money is going to run out.
Right.
And there was lots of kvetching when the retirement percentages dropped dramatically. And they said, well, we have to cut, we can't cut our budgets, we have to pay for so much more because the money ran out. Well, gee, I've only been saying it for 4 years.
Right.
So what's your plan for New Hampshire?
I mean, clear and simple, we have to end the addiction to federal monies. I mean, one of the biggest reason right now why we're not out of No Child Left Behind is because they keep dangling the $50 million carrot, saying, well, if you stay in the program, you're going to have $50 million of federal funds. And the bureaucrats are all saying, well, you know, we don't want to lose that funding. I'm sorry. It's a failed program. It's a federal program that's handcuffed the local communities, and we shouldn't be in that program anymore. And if that meaning to have to say bye to the $50 million because of it, then we need to find a way to do that. But absolutely, you're right, Skip. We have to end the federal, the addiction to federal funds, because what it is doing, for instance, in Medicaid, this is a great example. You know, the feds keep changing the rules such that they're saying, okay, New Hampshire, if you still want your portion of federal funding, then guess what? You've got to come up with more money as a state in order to get that federal funding. So they're leading us off the cliff. And it is an unsustainable process to keep going through that. So, as governor, I'd look for every way to try to end the addiction that we have right now to that federal funding. It's also why, by the way, I wasn't a big fan of when the Bush administration wanted to start allowing faith-based nonprofits to be applying for federal grant money, because I knew what was going to happen. You know, those programs sometimes are so effective because they learn how to operate on a shoestring budget, and they have to work for the money that they're getting and show that they're an effective program for people and private charities to fund it. When you start getting federal money, you forget how to be effective and work to get that money. And guess what happens? The federal government gives that money, but all of a sudden they say, oh, we're turning the faucet off, you're not getting it anymore. And those programs a lot of times end up going away because now because they came so reliant on that federal money, they don't have any more private funds to operate that business anymore. So, I couldn't agree more. It's unsustainable, and the state has to stop its addiction.
Thanks. There was a question in the back?
Yeah, we have one state rep for every 3,300 people, and we've got one Senate member for every 55,000 people. And when the Constitution, when they were talking about that in Philadelphia, Washington said that at 30,000 people to one rep, you have representation. At 40,000, you got tyranny. And right now, everything I've seen in the House ends at the Senate. It doesn't go anywhere because there's not enough senators. They're too easy to buy out. They got campaigns coming up. Those things cost a lot of money. What are you guys planning on doing is there any plans? I haven't heard anybody talk about this anywhere.
Well, I guess I would say that, I don't think it's so much the nature of the size of the Senate. I just think if people are unhappy with their representation, either at the Senate level or the House level, they got to put in the right representation. It's incumbent upon the voters to pick the right representatives and put them in there. So I don't think we necessarily need to change the size via the Constitution. I just think we need to vote the right people into office in those positions.
If that's the case, then we have representation at large. If I'm not happy with a particular rep, I have 4 or 5 different people that I'm not sure who to be upset with. If we had single-member districts, then I would know exactly who I'd want to put in. How do you feel about that?
So you're saying reducing the House size to have single-member districts?
Increasing the state Senate size to single-member.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's not something I've given a lot of thought to, but I will now that you've raised it here tonight. But you know, I mean, look at New Hampshire's legislature it's the 3rd largest legislative body in the world, and I think that's great. I think it's great that we have so much representation per capita, and obviously, yeah, there's a big difference between a 400-member House and a 24-member Senate. But you know, again, first and foremost, I think it's making sure we elect the right people into office.
The reason I bring it up is we have the banking crisis we have here came about rather rapidly, and it hit the entire world the same way. In Iceland, they have 1 rep for each 5,000 people, and in Iceland, the way they chose to handle they didn't do a bailout. They chose instead to jail the bankers and forgive the foreclosures. And that's because they have a high rate of representation in the government, and there's a lot of people that would lose their spot. You know, we have, I think it's the 3rd largest representation in the House, but it's bottlenecked by the Senate.
And that would have to be a constitutional amendment.
Right.
Set to that, because that's the only way you could get that done.
Right.
And that would have to go through both the House and the Senate. It's sort of like saying, putting out term limits. Would you like term limits? Well, the only term limit you're ever going to get is vote them out, because you're not going to get them to vote themselves out. So you have to kind of like, you know, either you got to get a lot of people to agree to to change the Constitution, and that's, I think, the biggest problem that we run into, because we tried to do that this year with several key constitutional issues, and I think we only got 1 or 2 through.
Right.
So you know, it's tough. It's a hard way to change something.
Is there any more questions? Okay, well, I encourage everybody to track the candidates down, ask them more questions, and don't leave me with any leftover food, okay? So thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah. Thanks again.
Yes.
GrokTV.